Welcome back. It's still the Daybreak show on Trust TV. Now, over 900 people have died in boat mishaps in Nigeria in the past 3.5 years as unregulated waterways continue to claim lives. Our President Bola Tinubu had ordered an investigation into recent boat accidents, but experts urge the federal and state governments to go beyond rhetoric and take concrete actions to address the problem. This morning, we discussed the safety of Nigeria's inland waterways, which crisscross 28 states and span more than 10,000 kilometers. Joining us via Zoom from Yola, the Adamawa state capital, is Dr. Agosu Bamai. He is a social development expert. Welcome to the program, Doctor.
Thank you for having me, and good morning to Nigerians.
Yes, good morning once again. So, can you tell us your experience? Because I understand that you stay, around some of these areas which had recorded some of these boat mishaps in the past. So, let's start by getting your thoughts on what you think could have been the problems which led to these issues, this unfortunate incidents.
Well, I live in Numan, and I remember growing up, we had linking the eastern and northern banks of the River Benue, Aroro ferry, roll in and roll out ferry in those days. And before the bridge was built in 1978, and so people no longer use the ferry, it moved down to Taraba State. But up to now, people still use a lot of water transportation in communities across the state. And part of the problems, in my thinking, is that the equipment, that's the boats that they use, a lot of them are old, and some of them are not safe enough. Majority of them are these wooden boats, and they have just a single outboard engine, and the usual practice is to overload them, because these boats do not go on and off all the time. They don't connect the places all the time, maybe once or twice a day. So they wait until there are lots of passengers. So the boats are carrying, and these passengers come with their goods, stuff they bought from the market. They want to move to their communities. You usually don't come out of those communities easily. So when you have an opportunity, you buy whatever you would need to sustain you. So the boats are heavy with goods, overloaded with passengers, and not powered enough, just a single outboard motor. And most of them are made of wood. And so you would expect that from time to time there would be accidents. And unfortunately, there usually is accidents. You usually have accidents in any given year, and that's why you have those huge numbers that you are given out, because it's all across the country, 28 states with waterways running, and a lot of these waterways are used by people for their transportation, especially rural people who don't have roads coming into their communities. And we need to remember, to put it in perspective, that over 70% of Nigerians live in rural areas.
Yes, indeed.
So it's a very large number that make use of these boats to move around from community to community.
Okay. All right. So now let's talk about standards and also regulation. We're supposed to be joined by the Director General of the Nigerian Inland Waterways Authority, but unfortunately, Dr. George Moghalu, we've not been able to establish a connection with him. However, what do you have to say about standards and regulations as regards, traversing the inland waterways? Has enough been done? What ought to be done? Who should be held responsible when, there are cases of these boat mishaps? Because as you know, the president has called for an investigation on some of these collapses and mishaps.
Well, the standards are very low, pretty low. Abysmal, I must say, in most cases. We're still using wooden boats, old type wooden boats. And again, like I said, they're not powered enough to handle the kind of load they are meant to carry. Usually they are overloaded. You know, people are sitting, hanging, literally hanging by the sides of the boat. And so the standards, a lot has to be done there. And I personally have suggested several fora and in various discussions with stakeholders that we need to move away from these wooden boats. There are synthetic boats that are unsinkable. In other words, if they capsize, they don't go down. They don't go down with the load. They don't go down with the people. At least the people can have something to hang on to until they are rescued. But these old wooden boats usually will sink and then go down, and you have people floating around with nothing to hold to. So yeah, as far as standards are concerned, there's a lot that needs to be done. Lagos State, maybe we'll talk about that a little later. It's a very good example of a state that has taken the bull by the horns and is doing something as far as water transportation is concerned, and it's modernizing it. So the safety around the Lagos area, around Badagry, around Lekki, around those other places in Lagos that use water transportation has improved over time. And the comfort also has improved. So maybe we'll talk about that a little later. Regulations, the problem is the general problem we have in Nigeria. We have regulations, but nobody's looking at them, nobody's enforcing them, and nobody's doing anything about it. So it's as good as not having regulations. It's as good as not having laws at all. So it's a free-for-all. Everything goes. And until there is a major accident and we lose a lot of people, then the government turns around and constitutes a committee. The committee sits and comes up with a report. The report is submitted. We probably get a white paper, and then everything returns to normal. Nothing is done beyond that. But this time around, we have to do something, and we have to do something fast. And it centers around modernizing water transportation, providing standards of safety and security as are found around the world.
Doctor, you mentioned, the continuous, or repetitive measures that the government take, where it's when the thing happened, then there will be committees that will start making the decision, and then after a while it will be abortive or aborted, and then we're back to the same thing over and over again. But while we're expecting, the government to make move on creating a better, mode of transportation, or, waterways, what about the people in charge of this boat? Because we've seen situation where people, when the boats capsize, there is nothing to hold on to. Just like you mentioned, the boat is not available, and there is a large number of people on one particular boat, and there is no lifeguard. No people are not wearing anything to protect them. Even when you can swim, the power of the water also can actually just take you away. So what should the people do? I mean, the people in charge of this boat, the people taking the people across from one place to another, and also you as a passenger, what should you do to ensure your own safety? Because as much as we want to point direction, point fingers at the government, we also need to do things, to protect ourselves as well.
Right, that's a very important question. No, if we leave the transporters to themselves, they would always go for what is cheap. And usually, what is cheap is not safe enough. So, of course, we need a government intervention, government supervision as far as this is concerned. The senator representing my senatorial zone did something last year that I would want to use as an example. He saw the challenges and the difficulties that people go through when they travel on the waterways. And he decided to intervene. And what he did was he supplied a number of these boats that I mentioned earlier, made of synthetic material that don't sink. He supplied unsinkable boats, not in sufficient numbers, of course, but you don't expect that he alone would shoulder that. And then he also supplied life jackets, lots of life jackets to cover each of those boats that he provided. And apart from the life jackets, you also have these life balls that were also supplied. You can these tire-like things that are tied to a rope that you can throw out to somebody who has fallen into the water, so you can hold through and you can pull him back to the boat. He also supplied that. Now, these are areas that we need to be looking at. First of all, the transporters, when you want to go and buy a boat, and I'm talking about these smaller boats, I'm not talking about ferries, because transporters would not be able to afford ferries themselves. The government will have to provide ferries because of the expensive nature of ferries. But majority of the transportation is done by these smaller boats that take maybe 50 people. And instead of taking those 50 people, you end up with 150 people in a boat that have a capacity just for 50 people. Now, we have to ensure that we move away from the wooden boats and make sure that we buy and use those made of synthetic unsinkable material. The other thing is provision has to be made for life jackets. You know, if your boat is taking 50 people, provide 50 life jackets. Don't move people from one point to the other without life jackets. Unfortunately, you have 120 people in a boat and none of them is wearing a life jacket, including the operators of the boat. We just feel like, well, if it happens, it happens. Let's just go. And because we have done this since we were kids, nothing happened. We just assume nothing will ever happen. So life jackets are very, very important. The conditions of the boats are very, very important. And then making sure that you do not take people beyond the capacity of the boat. And also making sure that you have sufficient power, that your boat is powered sufficiently. Something happened to me once that I would like to point to. It was very funny. I had to go somewhere. It was during the flooding. It was last year, during last year's floods. You remember the flooding last year was particularly heavy, that President Buhari had to set up a committee to look at ways with which we can permanently solve the flooding problems. So we visited several communities and to talk with the people, have interviews with the people and all that. One of the communities we went to, we had to take a boat. I demanded to have life jackets, but there were no life jackets. Not in that boat, not in any boat on that port, not anywhere in the community. But it was an unsinkable boat. So somehow I said to myself, well, let's go. We went. And on our way back, the flooding season. And then we ran out of fuel. In the middle of the Benue.
In the middle of the Benue.
We ran out of fuel.
Wow.
That's to show you the attitude of the operators. I mean, very bad. He didn't tell us that he did not have sufficient fuel. It was just in his mind, let's manage. Somehow we will come back.
Doctor, just to get you right, you ran out of fuel in the middle of the Benue River without life jackets.
That's right.
So how did you manage to get
jackets
back to your location?
Was there a paddle, you know, he wanted to go all local?
Funny enough, they didn't have paddles. They didn't have paddles at all. And the nearest bank.
Interesting. So, Doctor, now, according to the Daily Trust, the following states in Nigeria have recorded the highest number of casualties from boat mishaps in the last 3 years. Broken down, we have Niger with the highest, 200 plus casualties. There's Lagos with 100 plus, and then there's Kebbi with 50 plus. Akwa Ibom has 40, Adamawa has 30, that's your state, of course, and Nasarawa with 20. Now, other states included is Cross River with 15, Benue and Sokoto
eventually, in about 30 minutes each. Eventually.
Doctor, this is quite a high number of casualties. We're talking about human lives in the hundreds. And fortunately, the president has called for an investigation. However, with having this sort of high number of people who have died from boat mishaps in Nigeria, someone has to be held responsible, someone has to be arrested, and of course, I dare say someone has to go to jail for all of this. Who should be held to account?
Well, if we were speaking about this in some other country, then certainly someone will go to jail. In Nigeria, we've seen worse things and nobody went to jail. We've seen things happen and nobody takes responsibility for it. Because you cannot hold people responsible where you have laws that are not enforced. So yeah, the enforcement agents should be liable. Those who are supposed to enforce these laws but are not enforcing them. The criminal negligence from the operators, because the incident I was trying to share with you there, it's actually negligence from the operator, because we asked questions. He just did not tell us that he did not have sufficient fuel. I mean, one would assume that he had sufficient fuel. And so it was negligence, deliberate negligence on his part that put our lives at risk. Fortunately, we survived it, and I'm here today to tell the story. So the operators, if an investigation is done and we see criminal negligence on the part of the operator, then of course they should be held responsible. Perhaps that will make the other operators to sit up and know that if things go wrong, I will be held accountable, and that will make them go the extra mile to provide the necessary safety for their passengers. And then, of course, the regulators. But if they are held responsible in a particular incident, that will make them to sit up again all across the country to make sure that they do what is supposed to be done. I mean, sometimes you get to these people, you look at their boats, they are in such a bad state, they should be grounded, and you have people telling you, well, where would they find money to feed and take care of their families? I mean, let's allow them to continue to do it so they can feed their families. In the process of feeding their families, they destroy the breadwinners. The breadwinners of other families lose their lives. It's really a bad situation that stern measures have to be taken so that we sit up and begin to work towards sanity and get things properly done.
Doctor, we are looking at, all the measures that need to be taken in order to avoid or at least reduce, the numbers of fatality of this particular situation. So what about, the divers, professional divers? We've had situations or stories where you'd see it has to be the local divers that would rush in to save people, but how many people can one person save, in a particular, something that has to do with a time frame and time period? And we all know that these passengers, not many of them can swim, So what is done, what is being put in place, to have professional divers waiting at the bank of each side of the river in order to help people in case of situations like this?
Well, I think in standardizing inland waterways transportation, we have a good example in Nigeria that we can look at, which is what is happening in Lagos State. First of all, the boats have been modernized. You have standard boats, modern boats, strong enough, powerful enough, and also standard ferries in all the routes. Also, these boats have transponders on them, so from the control office where which boat is at what time and what it is doing. They also have electronic alert system where you can press on the alert system if something is wrong, and then help can be sent out without waiting for the old-fashioned way of getting information that there has been a boat mishap. Before the boat mishap, you can actually indicate. In addition, there are trained divers on the art of rescue, and these divers sit on the boats. You have some of them on the boat, and each time the boat is moving and traveling, they are there to provide services in case they are needed. And then you also have sufficient life jackets, which is very, very important. Apart from that, you have patrols. You have boats that are set aside for patrols. And they go around with trained divers just to keep an eye on what is going on generally as the normal transportation is going on. And also, the riverways are checked, for rocks that might be not deep below the surface, but just close to the surface, but because we're not seeing it, we don't know it's there. Sometimes a boat can run on it, and then you have an accident. There's the issue of dredging, but that needs to be done in some of these waterways to keep them deep enough to provide safety for the movement of those boats. So lots of issues that we need to look at, but we have a good example in Lagos that we can leverage on and then multiply that all across the country.
All right. So, Doctor, you've spoken so highly of Lagos State, and on this side, we've been talking about what the federal government intends to do. So, what should state governments do, differently this time to emulate Lagos, for example, and also much more, because you know that Lagos is peculiar because it's a state of its own, and states vary, from region to region. So, what's the expectation from other governors across the regions of the country where there's waterways traversing?
I would suggest that, like they do with road transportation, in my state here, there's an agency that handles road transportation. And this agency is supplied with vehicles, you have terminals and all the facilities that are necessary and all that. But a lot of people in my state move on the water. I would suggest that the governors and the governments of those states, just like they provide loans and vehicles for people who do road transportation, the same should be done for waterways transportation. Provide them boats, modern boats. I made reference to my senator earlier on who did that. So, and if these boats are made available and given to the transporters, even if it's a loan that they would have to pay back after some time, they would take it. For most of them, they don't have the money to go out there on their own and buy those boats. But if the government supply the boats, then the government can put conditions. Every passenger must put on their life boots, so you must their life jackets. So you must have sufficient life jackets on the boat and no overloading. If you have high goods, lots of goods to move, then move them in a separate boat. Don't combine goods and passengers in the same boat. So these are things that the government can do. Build terminals, put your officials there, make provision for patrol boats, and train divers, make them part of the state civil service. They are employed by the state and paid by the state to be on standby, to be on those patrol boats on both sides of the river. Yeah, these are things that we can do that will help very well. And then issues of transponders to provide, to let us know where each boat is at any time and what it is doing. And I understand that they can be fitted in such a way that if the boat is overweight, it will also indicate. In road transportation, when you load a truck, it goes on a weighing machine that will indicate whether it's overweight or not before it's allowed to use our roads. Now, provisions are made in some places, but in most places we don't follow that. The transporter can also indicate that, and so we can hold responsible those who deliberately overload their boats just to make extra money. So a lot can be done. I would suggest that the governors should put heads together. There are lots of people who can provide solutions, and then be willing to put money into that and provide safety for our people. Remember, 70% of Nigerians live in rural areas, and a lot of them need to use boats.
Dr. Akoso, in your suggestion, for me, I feel like there's one place that I think, the government should, but I wanted to hear from you, but since you didn't point it out, I wanted to say, talking about your places like the Gurin in Fufore, places like the Njua, we're talking about the Niger Delta, the Niger River. Along that area, there's a lot of farmers. We see people moving from one village to another, and that is a constant situation. So even if the government should say provide the necessary equipment for people to use in order to make their movements easy, what about during the rainy season when we know that the flow of the water, the river, comes in a very high, should I say, capacity? So what should the government do? Don't you think the government should make, provision for bridges in order to make make it easier for people to move safer, for them to use the bridges than, for people to just rely on one means of transportation that is really, really risky?
Well, the government will tell you that bridges are expensive to build, and to connect these various communities, you will need several bridges.
But should that be an issue,
it's a good thing. No, it shouldn't be an excuse, but of course, that's what the government will tell you. I think that as a stopgap measure, we just need to standardize the water transportation for most communities. If they wait for bridges, unfortunately, might wait indefinitely. And life goes on. They must move. And since they have to move, and we may have plans for the bridges or not, then let's secure the water transportation. A lot of communities, as you pointed out, especially during rainy season, move from their communities to other communities and to their farms. And a lot of them also use boats during harvest to move their crops from the farms to their homes and then to the market. So we really need to work on that to help communities and help people do this safely. They are helping in providing food and protein, fish protein, etc., for the communities and for the nation. And we need to provide a condition where they do this safely. As it stands right now, the conditions are really not safe for waterways transportation. And of course, when I talked about maintenance, one of the things we should talk about is the dredging. Even if it's a local waterway, you mentioned Jua there, for instance. There used to be a festival, annual festival, Jua Festival, that was famous nationally. The festival hasn't held for over a decade now, and the reason being that the Jua River itself has dried up, filled up with sand, and so it's not holding water like it used to. Therefore, it's not providing fish like it used to. So the issue of dredging comes up again. So my thinking is this. Whereas there are standard ways we could take care of this, which are very expensive, before we do that, let us make what we are using now safe and secure for the people to use, which is provide modern boats, sufficient capacity, insist that the operators carry goods and passengers at the exact capacity, not beyond, and also provide other safety measures like life jackets, trained divers, and also patrol boats that will make sure that our people are kept safe.
All right, Dr. Aguso Bamais, social expert and also environmental analyst, thank you very much for your contributions on the program this morning. We do appreciate all of your perspectives.
Thank you for having me.
And just that's so much we can take on the program this morning. We do hope you enjoyed the package that we have provided. And if you missed the beginning and also the middle of the program, you could do well to follow us across all our social platforms, and as well watch us live on YouTube, where you could catch up on all of the goodies that you missed. And from me, it's a thank you very much for being a part of the program. Thank God it's Friday, and do have yourself a lovely weekend. I'm Sagir Ibrahim.
And I am Sumaya Abubakar. Hope you enjoyed staying with us this morning. Please do make sure to stick around for Emmanuel Fashemi, who will be bringing you the sports update this morning. Do have a lovely weekend.